Live. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to cover exploring FP&A leadership, priorities, team development, and strategy. We're going to give everybody a few more minutes, just going to give everybody about 30 seconds to join, and hopefully we can get a few more people to join. But in the meantime, I just wanted to give everybody a heads up that feel free to ask questions. I believe you can ask questions in the chat, and we will try and get to them as soon as we can. All right, I'm going to give everybody a minute more to join, and then we'll get started on the minute. All right, well, great. Thanks everyone for joining. Today we're talking about exploring FP&A leadership, priorities, team development, and strategy. And I'm very honored to have Glenn Snyder here today. Glenn is an FP&A executive with more than 2 decades of finance experience across a range of multi-billion-dollar organizations with specialties in global finance, short and long-term strategy, business efficiency, team building, and corporate FP&A, to name but a few. He has built corporate strategy and FP&A teams from scratch, lectured on corporate finance and international trade, contributed to multiple publications, and still found time to be a regular panelist on the FP&A Friday podcast. We are lucky to have such a wealth of experience on hand this afternoon to discuss FP&A leadership and team development and strategy. Glenn, thank you.
Thanks for having me, James.
Today we are planning to talk about FP&A leadership, priorities, team development, and strategy. It's a long title. So hoping to cover more of the soft skills on FP&A today. First, I'd like to start off on the team development. One of the most rewarding parts of the FP&A team leadership, but often one of the hardest areas to master. You have built up 4 corporate strategy and FP&A teams. So my first question is, what advice would you give a new FP&A manager starting out and having to build a new FP&A team?
So one of the hardest things when you're building a team from scratch is you will have no blueprint. You have to, and every company is going to be different. So when you're managing somebody, if you're just coming in new and you're building a team from scratch, or even if you are coming into an organization, but you have to add to your team, the first thing you have to really understand is, what do you need? And focus not on what the immediate need is, but what are the long-term needs? Because when you hire people, that's a long-term, it's a long-term task that you're doing. So you don't want to hire somebody for something and say, oh, I have a project, I need to get through this in the next 3 months, and then we'll figure it out after that, because you could end up hiring the wrong person. So understand what the needs are and figure out, are your needs really something that could be solved by a system and technology, or is it something that would be done really from more analytical, taking information and disseminating it out to an audience, those types of things where you're really going to need a person. So that to me is the first thing I would do, is to really understand what is the true need and what needs can be satisfied with technology and which ones have to be done by people.
Okay. Yeah, you talk a little bit about needs. So just from your experience, what are the typical needs that you would see in an organization where you would actually go out and hire a new person versus, like, as you say, we look at technology to solve that problem? What are the things that you see typically coming up?
So needs to me get broken down in a couple different areas. One is around data, organizing data, synthesizing it, analyzing it, producing reports around data. Most of that can be done in a system, but systems can't analyze and report out as well. They can report out, but they can't report out the findings and how that data is supposed to be used. That is really around a person. The other piece of it that is really people related is developing a partnership. When you have a partnership with a line of business, you're going to be integrating with them. You're going to be understanding what they do. And so you're going to be interacting in such a way that it's not going to be just, hey, I'm giving you data, do what you want with it. It's going to be understanding how to apply that data, but giving guidance on how to give those leaders, the right ideas and set them up with the right information to make the best decision possible. So really what you want to do, the needs that typically come up is, who do you need to have a partnership with? Where is your data coming from? What's the quality of that data? And then what is the group going to look like 6 months down the road once you have some of those issues solved, such as you might solve the quality of data issues and now it can be automated. That could be more of a system-driven thing versus a person thing.
Okay. So yeah, and then I think the next question is really, once you've started to develop that team and you've identified, once you've hired that team or you're building up that new team, when are the times that you think that you sort of need to get more involved? Or, what are the signs that you would see that where you need to spend more time on team development?
So one of the big red flags that usually comes up is if you have a finance business partner, let's say that's supporting the marketing group, but that chief marketing officer is coming to you as the head of the group instead of their business partner, that's a little bit of a red flag. That tells you that that marketing leader does not have the confidence that the questions they're asking are going to be answered, or the person that they're dealing with might not fully understand what's going on, and they want to go to a higher level person to make sure that they're going to get a different kind of result. And so when those types of things come up, you never want to exclude your business partner, the person who is on your team. Do not leave them out. First of all, you might want to go and do, as the leader, go out and reach out to that marketing leader, in my example, and ask them why it is that they're not going directly to that person. Do they have any concerns? And get some direct feedback on your employee. But as you go through and work through whatever those questions are, bring that employee along to make sure that they understand the bigger picture. Don't necessarily give them that direct feedback, because that might have been more just meant for you as the leader, but coach them in the areas that they need to get better. Is it in timing, responsiveness? Is it quality of work? Is it seeing a bigger picture? And coach them through that and hold their hand and do it together, so that after maybe another few meetings, you could then hopefully hand that person off again, and you can then step back. So that's one area. The second area is to really see, is your team delivering data, or are they delivering solutions? If they're delivering data, they're going out and saying, hey, look, you have a budget variance. Your budget variance is this. Okay, great. Why? What's going on? Can they put it in the right context? Another example is, can they take data from different areas and pull it together to come up with a big picture solution? Typically, if you have more junior people on the team, or if you have newer people, they're going to have a harder time doing that. And that's when you're going to want to go and do some more team development around, what does the company do? What's the industry? What's going on in the industry? What are the key metrics and drivers to make sure your team is well grounded in the business that the company is in? The third area is really about how to develop a partnership. And this is one around really what I think is most important, which is empathy. Understanding how to interact with somebody and recognize, we in finance, it's important. The work that we do is very, very important to the company. But we don't drive revenue, and we don't interact with customers. And so as important as we think we are, there are groups that we are supporting that are on the front lines. And so we have to recognize that it's not always about what we want. It's about what the business needs as well. And so understanding and having that empathy, thinking about, what does that chief marketing officer need from me, not just what do I need to get out of a meeting with the chief marketing officer. And one of the things I always like to recommend is, if you're going to go out and meet with a business partner for 30 minutes, 15 minutes of your meeting absolutely should be around, hey, you know what? I need to get this information for our forecast, or I need to get better clarity on exactly what's going on here to explain these variances. Fine. But then the last 15 minutes should be spent just asking the question, what else can I do for you? Is there anything that I can do to help you achieve your goals? Any additional data that I could provide, any insights, any connections that I could make to help make your role easier to achieve your goals? Because at the end of the day, you're all working for the same company.
No, that's great. That's great. I think definitely, where we've seen empathy and really putting your feet in the shoes of your business partners, you can definitely get a lot more out of the relationship. And I think that helps to kind of develop that relationship, build stronger bonds especially if people think that you're invested as well. So what are the things that you would do, just staying on the topic of empathy, you've talked a little bit about working with the business partner, but how would you coach your team, for example, to be and understand better the business partner, and what are their needs compared to the needs of the finance team? How would you go about that?
Well, ironically, I actually have a deck that goes through and talks about how to use empathy, what empathy is all about, and how to become a better business partner. So I actually take my entire team through that deck, and because I think it's just good training. It takes about 2 hours, so we usually break it up into two 1 hour sessions so that people can think about it. And you do it typically in a time before the team's really going to go out and start interacting with people. So maybe a month or two before the budget process starts or something like that. But I think it's also important to recognize that a partnership is not about you and it's not about them. It's about the two of you working together. And it's a two-way street. It's not a one-way street. So if all the information is flowing in one direction, you need to step back and say, wait, hold on. Am I receiving all this information and they're just providing data to me? Or am I just being the one to provide data to them? And regardless of what direction that information is flowing, if it doesn't flow both ways, you don't have a partnership. And so you got to look at how do you go and balance that? Sometimes it's asking a question around how can you help? Sometimes it could be just being proactive and saying, I'm thinking about your business. Last time we talked, you mentioned you were having some issues around this. Hey, I put this one slide together with some key metrics. Would something like this help? And just showing that you are interested in looking out for them, that's to me, that's a really big step. The other thing to recognize is a lot of people talk about communication, how important communication is. But communication isn't just about you. Doesn't matter what you say or what you write in an email. What it also matters, just as important, I should say, is the person you're talking to and what they hear or what they read. Because I could say the most brilliant thing to you in Swahili, but if you don't understand Swahili, it adds no value to you whatsoever. So what's important is to understand how you're coming across and to talk to people in a way to make sure that they are going to get this exact same message that you are trying to send. And when you communicate and you connect to make sure that you're both saying the same thing, you typically build out greater trust and greater partnership.
Yeah, and I think it's trying to understand what keeps your business partners awake at night. To really kind of help serve them. I mean, that is the key. I always joke about the role of FP&A is is a consulting role. It's sort of like you have to figure out what your customer wants, and figure out how you can provide something to them, and just by asking a lot of questions. So my next question is more around time management, because I think, or at least motivation. I think the FP&A role is extremely demanding. Often during budgeting times, we have long hours. We have we want to be great business partners. We need to spend time with our business partners on top of kind of just doing our everyday tasks. So my question is, how do you keep people motivated when there are those situations where we have long hours, there's a lot of demands on the role, etc.
So it's a great question. And especially for people who are working remote, you tend to work much longer hours than when you're physically in the office. And I think a lot of us are working remote a lot more than we used to. When it comes to the motivation, it's really understanding what the impact of what you're doing is. And most people, if they know what they're doing is going to make a difference, they're going to be more motivated to go and do it. So if your team is not sure how the work that they're doing is going to have an impact on the company or the business that they're supporting, take a step back. Make sure that they understand it. Give them that bigger picture. And maybe even have the business leader provide that context, or even have the person ask a bit that, if this is something that you're doing a lot of work for a particular business that, that you're supporting, maybe say, hey, I just want to understand, how is this going to be used? Where is it you're really trying to go? Rather than just go and take, oh, yep, okay, you want all this data and compile into this model, fine. But understanding that context, I think, is an important thing. The other thing that I think is very important when it comes to motivating your team is about understanding where each of your team members want to go for their career. How do they want to develop? So ask the members of your team, and it should be in your one-on-ones that you have with them on a regular basis, but even people that might be reporting into people that you are managing, understand how they want to build and grow their careers and try and give them those opportunities. So, for example, I was at a company and I had a woman who reported to me, and she said she and her fiance always wanted to live in Asia. And at some point, they wanted to go and move and work in Asia. And we were a global firm and we had a big office in Singapore. Just by knowing that, when there were certain projects that would come over that would involve Asia, I tossed them her way. This way, I knew she would have a little extra motivation, wanting to learn, wanting to connect with people. And it was not only was it good for the FP&A team because you got someone who's really excited about doing the work, you got someone else who says, wow, my manager's looking out for me to help me learn and grow in the area that I want to go. And you typically build a much more loyal employee who will produce better work just because they're more excited about what they're doing.
No, that's great. So we got Glenn's two P's: purpose and progress. Progression. Yeah, no, purpose. I've always felt that is a key to being able to, throughout life, just having, knowing what your purpose is. And I think that's something sometimes we forget about that when we're kind of so busy and, trying to get the reporting out or trying to get the budgets finalized. So I think, just understanding like the big picture of kind of where the company's going, why it's going, and what we're doing, and why it's important, I think is critical to anybody's keeping anybody motivated. But I do like the one about, just understanding, where people are going and trying to understand where they, what they want to do in the future and how that kind of fits in with their current role. So those are great points.
Yeah, if I could actually add to that, James, just one thing, because if you have someone, let's say, who's really interested in marketing analytics and they're supporting the legal and HR group, nothing wrong with legal and HR, but it's a completely different line of business. If there's an opening and you know that you can maybe move that person over to an area that they want to go to, there's a really good chance that that employee is not only going to be excited about doing it, but they're going to stay with the group much longer. If you keep someone working in an area where they're not really thrilled, even though they're competent, after a while, they're probably going to start looking for another job and you're going to lose that employee. So if that person's really good, make sure that you're getting them in an area that they're going to want to build and grow their own career.
No, that's great. So you talked a little bit about this, the kind of the remote work versus in person in the office and things like that. How do you think that you are kind of managing teams differently? Is there anything that you're doing different to before when we were all working together in an office?
Yeah. I mean, it's, when I would go into an office 5 days a week, my team would typically sit outside my office and, they would have their cubes and my door was always open and they would come in and have questions or whatever, or I would go out and I would go and talk to them. Lunch would come up and I would say, hey, you guys want to go grab lunch or whatever. It was very casual and I was interacting and got to know people in a much more personal way because we just interacted a lot more often. And when you're working remotely, it's a lot harder to do that. The one thing I would recommend is, we all have some kind of instant messaging tool, whether it be Teams or Slack or, whatever. Make sure you're connecting with your team. Ask them some questions, just like you would if you were in person, but engage with them and recognize, hey, if they're in a meeting, you're obviously going to, don't keep on pinging them online, but go and say, hey, when you have a minute, let me know. And then, just set up a casual call. At the same time, recognize that these are people. They're not just, systems. So ask them about their day. Don't forget to, find out a little bit about them. Usually people like to talk about themselves or some of the things that are going on in their lives. Give them that opportunity because you're not able to go in a physical office and say, hey, let's go out for a walk. Maybe you stretch your legs, get out of the office. By the way, when you do go to offices, for those of you who work in hybrid, I love the idea of doing one-on-ones where you're just going out for a little stroll around the neighborhood. It gets you away from the office, you have privacy and all that, but it's a different environment. It kind of makes people feel a lot more relaxed. But if you can't do that because you're working in different cities or you're all working remote, just set aside some time and make sure you're talking to somebody about things that interest them as well. Don't make it all about work, because if you could go and make that personal connection, again, you're going to drive greater loyalty, you're going to drive greater interest and greater motivation in doing the work.
No, that's great. I mean, keeping people motivated, I think it's even harder now than it's ever been, to understand, what kind of motivates people, especially now, we have teams all over the world. And we have tools like Zoom and Teams, which are great, but you miss that human connection, and I think that's something that we have to compensate a lot for.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so I think just turning the table slightly, we talked about, as a leader, but a lot of people watching the webinar now, are also have managers. So I'm just curious to know, how do you, as an FP&A person, also manage up? I mean, as an FP&A leader, we often report into the CFO or other vice president of FP&A or somebody like that. But even everybody typically has some manager. How do you feel? Good tips are. I mean, what are your tips for being able to manage up?
So that's a great question. There is one thing that I always do, and I even write this out when you have to do annual goals. I make sure it's in my goals every single year, and it's very simple. Do not let my boss get blindsided. It is the worst thing that can ever happen to you or your boss if they go into a meeting and someone starts talking about something that you're involved in and you didn't update your boss on, and your boss like, yeah, I have no idea what that's about, because it makes it look like the team isn't talking or working together, and it puts your boss in a very awkward situation. So the first thing that I always tell my boss is my job is to make sure that he or she is never blindsided in a meeting. Now, doesn't mean it works out perfectly, but you have to be conscious and aware of it. And usually when you say that to your boss is going to appreciate it and say, wow, you're going to look out for me. I appreciate that. That's important. So that's one thing. The second thing is, I always like, if you're going to err on one side or the other, over communicate rather than under communicate. Make sure that, let your boss say, okay, you know what, I got enough information, I'm good, versus having them to constantly pull information from you. Because when they're pulling information from you, they are not feeling like you are providing what they need to manage, to manage that larger group. So be proactive, over communicate rather than under. And then the third piece is to always go in, and this is something that I've always done with my bosses, and it's always gone over well. In fact, it's always differentiated me oftentimes from my peers, is when I have a one-on-one with my boss, a day, typically, I try and do it a day in advance if I can put it together. I send them an email with a bullet point listing of, here's all the things that the team has been doing over the last week, and here are all the outstanding questions and what I need from my boss. And this way, then they can read that in advance. And your one-on-one, they're going to start going through, yep, okay, I'm good with that. I'm good with that. Oh, wait, hold on. I have a question about this. And if you've basically set the agenda for your meeting, if you go into a one-on-one with your boss and you make your boss set the agenda, you are not going to get out of it what you need. The one-on-one should be more about you as the employee and your time with your boss to have the conversation, go over the stuff that you need, not necessarily what your boss needs. Your boss will tell you what they need all the time throughout the entire week. So turn the tables. You set the agenda. And every time I've done this, I've gotten phenomenal feedback from my bosses, because they don't have to worry about coming up with an agenda. You've already gone over and laid everything out. And typically, when I do this, I covered 95% of whatever they want to cover with me anyway.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I think a lot of times, we don't even have one-to-one. So I think, having the one-to-one, being able to manage it, being able to manage kind of what you want to talk about, and just, being able to articulate, and being able to control that meeting, I think, is a great way of being able to manage it. And I think, it's a great opportunity to kind of have that one-to-one time as well, because I think it's so difficult. You get caught up in all the work that you're doing, and being, you just don't have the time to have those conversations. So, it's being able to set time aside is critical to being able to manage that relationship.
And in fact, actually, one of the things that I make sure my team knows is, for all my direct reports, I tell them, we're going to have an hour that I'm going to set aside every single week. You don't use the full hour, fine. But it's there and it's for whatever they need me for. They have that hour and they know that now I'm going to be dedicated to hearing their issues, helping them solve their problems. And it is a time that is dedicated for them. And if, as I said, sometimes, you go through and it takes 20 minutes and you say, okay, well, you got 40 minutes back. That's fine. Other times they want to talk about sports or, a movie or whatever it is. Fine. It's their time with you. And by showing, by you as the boss, showing that your employee is important to you, it carries so much weight with that employee, especially to recognize no matter how good you think you are, you cannot be successful without your team. That's why you have that team. And so it is your job as the boss to make sure that you are setting that team up for success. And if that means that they need some time with you to go through certain things and think through and whiteboard or just get your take on things, you got to make sure you're dedicating that time to your team and show them how important they are. So having that 1 hour a week just dedicated to each of your directs, it goes a long way.
No, that's brilliant. So we talked a little bit about remote work and everything, and I was just curious to hear your thoughts on just team building, because it is harder these days. So how do you make a team more cohesive? Being able to get people to work together as opposed to just having individuals kind of contributing and not really interacting with each other. How do you go about doing that in this new norm?
So, when you get people who are all over the world, you got people in different time zones and so on, it is very difficult to go over and do any kind of team building exercise. However, one of the things that I always do is I'll have my one-on-ones with everybody, of my direct reports every week. Every other week, I typically do a direct reports meeting to make sure my directs are talking to each other and they understand what's going on in the different teams that are set up. And then at least once a month, usually monthly, I have a broader FP&A meeting that brings everybody together. And I have different people on the team present. So they talk about what's going on in their areas. This way, everyone can start interacting a little bit more with each other. So that's one thing when it comes to communication and just trying to make people feel connected. The second thing that I try and do is when I have a project that might not be a normal project. And what I mean a normal project, like if you're supporting, a sales team and the sales leader is asking for something, they're going to go to the business partner for who supports sales. But sometimes you get something from the CFO or the general counsel or something that just comes out of the blue and you're not necessarily, you're not structured in a way to handle that request. I will oftentimes go over and send an email to my entire team and say, hey, I need 2 or 3 people to work on this project. Let me know if anyone is interested or has the capacity. And I let them volunteer for those particular projects. Generally, I get enough volunteers to do it. Every once in a while, you don't, and I have to go over and say, hey, you know what, can I get your help on this? But by doing that, by giving some projects, it allows people on different teams to kind of cross-pollinate, if you will. And now they're working with people they don't, even though you're all part of the FP&A team, you might not work as closely together. So having some of those projects where then they can present something back and they do it with a little different type of group typically builds a little more cohesiveness within the team.
No, that's great. I mean, you're spot on there. I think, just kind of doing that cross-pollination is kind of it helps kind of people get an understanding of the business as well, because I think if you're just sitting in your little silo of, your organization, you tend not to see the bigger picture, and it really helps to kind of get a view across the business. And talking about the business, sometimes we see business leaders not interested in engaging with FP&A. Just really asking for monthly reports and things like that. How do you overcome the obstacle and really build out that strong relationship, not necessarily in FP&A, but more on the organization as a whole?
It happens everywhere. There are some people where you go over, if you just come into a new organization, and there will be some business leaders who say, my FP&A person is my right-hand person. I need them at all my strategic meetings, my direct reports meeting, and you're instantly in. And there are other teams where people say, you know what, thanks, but I'll let you know if I need something from you. Until then, leave me alone. Those are much harder. And I've had lots of experience with those types of leaders. The challenging part is to build the trust. And for one thing is don't let somebody else dictate to you how you're going to do your job. Because so for example, if someone says, hey, you know what, just send me the reports. I'm not interested in anything else. I'll look them over myself. Don't take that as an answer. Go over and say, look, you know what? I appreciate that, but I'm going to set up a 30-minute meeting with you, and we are going to go through these reports together every single month to make sure you have the information you need, that you're not going to misinterpret something. And because you may miss something in the reports, but I put these things together. So I could tell you exactly the areas that you need to be looking at and what numbers you need to be watching and what you should be concerned about. By pushing yourself in there, even if it's just for a 30 minutes, you typically won't get a lot of pushback. You might every once in a while get the leader saying, oh, you know what, I need to move this around. Fine, be flexible. But take the opportunity every month, try and be in front of that leader, whether it be remotely or in person, for 30 minutes. Go into that meeting with an agenda. Don't just say, well, I'm here, and then magically expect them to open up to you. Go in there and say, here's what I'm going to explain to the person, how I'm going to walk them through the reports, what additional questions I'm going to ask, and pay attention to their answers. Because if they come back and they say, yeah, you know what, I've been seeing this one trend, but I'm not really sure what to do with this. I don't know if this is an issue or not. So, you know what, let's just move on from that, and we could come back to that later or something like that. Recognize that as an opening for you, that after you walk out of that meeting, dive into that data, put together a trend analysis, go pull some information around there, and then follow up within a week and say, hey, I know you said that you weren't quite sure what this was or what the impact was. I pulled some additional information. I think this might be helpful. Let me know if you want to talk. And by doing that, by being proactive, when the leader did not ask you directly to do something, you took the initiative to do it on your own. You might not get it right, but that leader is going to say, hey, you know what? I appreciate what you're doing. You're trying to look out for me. You're trying to help me. And by the way, you probably would get it 70, 80% right. And they're just going to come back and say, could you make these couple of tweaks? Otherwise, I could really use this. Now they're starting to gain confidence in you and to see you could deliver more value than just producing a budget variance report. So that's typically been the approach that I like to take. You go in there, you don't take no for an answer when it comes to meeting with them on a regular basis. You make sure that you go in there and you know exactly what you're going to say and what questions you're going to ask. So make sure you prep ahead of time. And then finally, be proactive and show them that you are there to help them and support them, not just to go over and regurgitate a bunch of numbers.
Yeah, and I think the key thing that you mentioned was listening. And I think that's kind of where, often in FP&A, I've seen that people go in, they want to share like all their wisdom, and they're not really there to listen. So I think being able to listen and understand kind of what are the pain points that your business partner is feeling, is trying to kind of solve, is all part of falls all under the heading of that empathy that you talked about earlier. Getting a deeper understanding for what makes what keeps that business partner awake at night, and what are the problems that he's trying to solve. And the sooner you understand that, the better the value you're able to provide them. So again, I think listening is that key.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, don't go in there and start spouting off your resume. Well, let me tell you about all these things that I've done in the past, because that's going to solve that business partner's needs. You got to listen exactly. You got to listen to what their needs are. What are the things that they are concerned about? What are the things that they need? And one of the great questions I love asking is you go over and you walk someone through a report and you say to them, what am I not giving you that you need to have? Is there something on this report that I'm putting in here that you don't need at all that I should remove? And how else can I improve this for you? Ask those questions. Now, those are all open-ended questions. They're not yes or no questions. Get them to speak and get them to share their ideas. And that's how you're going to learn how to work with them in a better way.
Yeah. And it's, and again, it's not just, throwing over tons of information and overwhelming them. We really want to get to the kind of what is the root, what are the problems we're trying to solve, and really be able to add that value.
You know what? And just to add to that, recognize that not everybody looks at data in the same way. And I've had some phenomenal relationships with some of the people in marketing throughout my career. But you go over and you give a lot of like CMOs or even just marketing leaders a big giant data sheet in Excel, it turns them off. Recognize that not everybody likes going through Excel or data sheets. Sometimes people prefer PowerPoint, or they'll say, show me a picture, put it in a graph. You want to show me a trend of something, show me a trend line, or show me a bar graph or something. Recognize your audience and how best to communicate that to them, because it might make sense to you, but remember, communication is a two-way street. So just because it makes sense to you doesn't mean it's going to make sense to somebody else.
Yep. No. So just very quickly, I did notice I am checking to see if there was any comments on LinkedIn. If anybody's got any questions, please post them in the comments. We'll try and get to them. I haven't seen anything yet. But so Glenn, the next question I have is more around, so what happens when you do have conflict? Often when you're doing a budget is especially a long-term budget is a tough exercise where you've got a lot of people with a lot of different opinions, and you're trying to balance them all off. How do you deal with conflict between your business partners and, trying to get to that, you obviously, part of the finance team, you have to get the best information possible, but at the same time you want to balance off, you can't just be be on the side of the business partner. You have to balance it off with the financial requirements of the company. How do you go through and manage that kind of conflict?
The first thing I do is to point out that you're on the same team. If you go over and you are arguing with each other, you're both trying to do what's best for the company, right? You're there because the company is saying we need to get this information, whether it be a budget or forecast, whatever it happens to be. Once you have that common ground, you then need to start expanding on it. And you have to go over and say, look, I understand you want to go over and take your entire team, all 52 people, to Disney World for an offsite, but we just don't have the expenses to do that this year. Why? Because we have to hit certain earnings targets. And those earnings targets, if you're a public company, for example, will help drive up the stock price, which, by the way, you won't. So you have a personal vested interest, and you kind of connect that big picture and to say, if you're going to go over and spend $200,000 more in one area, well, all that's going to do is flow straight to the bottom line, and now your company's less profitable. And most people will understand that. So usually what I like to say is, okay, you want to take your team to Disney World? Fine, that's on you, but you have to self-fund it. So what are you going to reduce in order to offset that additional spend? How are you going to go? What's that trade-off? Because at the end of the day, the CFO and the executives and the shareholders and everyone's expecting a certain growth, whether it be in EBITDA or earnings per share or whatever, and we have to hit that. So if you want to move your numbers around, okay, it's up to you on how to manage it. And you show that flexibility. But I need that bottom line number to be exactly the same as what we're going in with. So you tell me which is more important, to have these licenses for the software program, to hire these 3 new people, or to take the team to Disney World, because that's your call as a manager. I don't really care. You can spend it how you want. I'm just telling you can't go over that number. And so now people will start saying, okay, I have flexibility. And then they start thinking, wait a second, do I need to hire 2 more people? Is this trip to Disney World more important? Whatever it happens to be. But now you're letting that manager think through, how do they want to spend their funds rather than dictating it to them. Now they have a stake in the game. They're coming up to it, coming up with the answer. And you are interacting. And now all of a sudden it's not a conflict anymore, because you both agree that there's a certain number that they're allowed to spend. And you're saying, you spend it however you like, just let me know. And we'll put that into the budget.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely about giving those managers that visibility. And I think sometimes it's often lacking. Being able to make those trade-offs, you need the information, and being able to get a better understanding of kind of what those trade-offs are. So I think that's exactly to the point. Is like, give that visibility to your business partner. Make sure that they all believe that we're all on the same side. We're all trying to get to the same goals, and balance off those corporate required goals of hitting an EBITDA to the personal goals of your managers. So that's a great overview. So I appreciate it. Thank you. We do actually have a question, which is exciting. So in terms of building a new team, what strategies do you recommend as a manager to balance teams with entry level and senior professionals?
So the first thing you want to do is you want to show your boss, whether your boss is the CFO or just the head of FP&A or whatever, that it's not just about bringing in a whole bunch of top level talent, because that's going to be expensive and you're not going to probably have the budget to do it. You also want to show that you're going to build and grow a team that is going to allow people on the team to move their careers forward within the group. So don't go in there thinking, oh, you know what, if I had 4 directors, oh yeah, we could take care of all of this stuff. You know what? That's probably not the right way to go. Instead, you can maybe look at it and say, okay, what are the areas that I need that are going to require more experience, more knowledge than others? All right, let's put those over in a senior manager to director type role, and that's going to be maybe building out better partnerships or understanding the industry, those types of things. Seeing that bigger picture, putting together board decks, whatever that happens to be. Then you go over and you think about what are the other things? Well, we need day-to-day, we need people to analyze data, pull data. Maybe you don't have a centralized EPM or ERP solution, and you're pulling data from a bunch of different places. We're going to need someone to help pull all that stuff together. That's a lower skill. People get that when they're coming right out of college. So you say, okay, I don't need to pay a director to go over and move that stuff, or move data from point A to point B and consolidate that all together. So now you think about people who could be more junior. And then you think about what kind of falls in between. How would that junior person eventually build and grow through their career? Well, they start off with the data, then they start to analyze the data, then they interpret the data, and then they start coming up with solutions around it. So then you think, okay, can I have that director or that senior manager managing maybe these 1 or 2 smaller, lower level people, and have them coach in that area? Is that my job as the leader of FP&A if I'm building this out? Should I just be coaching them? I mean, the other thing you have to really keep in mind is the hierarchy that you're structuring. If you are a small company and you're going to have, let's say, 3 people total in FP&A, don't make it into a when I was at Visa, we call it a lollipop structure, right? You would have a circle, a line going down, another circle, and it just looks like lollipops stacked on top of each other, because all that does is create hierarchy. You might go over and say, you know what? Instead, I'm going to have 2 direct reports. And even though one person might be significantly junior to me, I can still coach and teach that person and help them manage up. At the same time, depending on, that person, there's a good chance they're going to look at it and say, wow, I'm a financial analyst. I'm reporting into the vice president. That's a really cool thing. And that gets them more motivated to go in. So think about just all these different options that you have. What I would say is there is no right answer. Best thing I would say is when you're building out a team, leverage your technology as much as possible. This way, all the moving data from point A to point B, the production of reports, the updating of slides, those types of things that can be automated by a system. Try and get a system to do that and let your people go and add more value. And then you structure your team so that you have people can learn and grow. Because I don't know about you, but if I went into a job right now where I had to go over and pull a bunch of data out of the system and produce monthly variance reports, I'd be like, I did that 20 years ago in my career. It's not really what interests me. So in order to go over and have people who want to stay in the roles, you've got to make their jobs challenging and make it interesting to them. So you have to recognize you can't have directors moving that data around, but you can have more junior people do that and give them that exposure to learn and eventually get up to that manager, senior manager, director level role.
Yeah. No, so you talked earlier about like the team that you were going to hire, to start out with. Do you think that hiring people that are just dedicated to transformation, because you've mentioned a couple of times now you really want to improve the systems, improve the quality of the data, improve kind of moving data from point A to point B. But often, if you're a junior analyst or even a more senior person, you may or may not have the skills to be able to do that. Do you think, have you seen in your previous roles hiring somebody just focused on transformation?
I have seen it, and it usually doesn't work out well. It works out great to go through the transformation, but then you got an employee who does not necessarily have the right skill set to fall into one of those other roles, or maybe they're not interested. In fact, when I was at Charles Schwab, there was a woman that was hired on a different team for a very specific project, and she crushed it on that project. But afterwards, she had to move into a business partner role, and it just did not work. She did not have that kind of personality. And so it just became a very bad situation for the business, for the finance team, and for the employee. So understanding short and long-term needs. If you are doing a transformation, it is by definition, it is something that should be fixed. Whether it be 3 months, 6 months, a year and a half, use a contractor. If you want someone just for that, and understand you get someone who specializes in doing transformations, who knows exactly how to go and pull all the pieces together and get everybody working together. But when the project's over, there's no issue. That person will be going away. Now, if it turns out that person's phenomenal, they want to stay there, and you end up creating another role, fine, you have that option too. But if you go over and hire a full-time employee, and it's a 6-month project, 6 months later, if you were, firing or letting that employee go, where the only thing that they did was they did a great job in transformation, but now you got nothing else for them, that's not a good situation. It doesn't feel good for the employee or for the business. So my recommendation would be use a contractor or use a consultant or something. And at the end of the day, they're probably going to cost about the same.
Oh, that sounds great. We're 3/4 of the way in, and we haven't started talking about strategy yet. So I'm gonna pivot slightly on strategy and priorities. So I think some great information about teams and team development. But for 2023, kind of what do you think, like in general, the FP&A team's priorities should be to really focus on for the next 9 months, I guess?
Well, first of all, every company has got different priorities. So there's no right answer for everybody. But in the market that we're in, the environment that we're in, really it's going to be about efficiency. How do you go over and produce more with less? How do you go and leverage automation in the best way possible? Because companies are not looking to add more to their finance teams when their revenue is falling, and they're going to have to let people go, right? It's the back office functions are the ones that are typically going to be cut first. They're not going to cut the sales guy who's going to be generating the revenue, and they're not going to cut the customer support people who are going to keep those customers happy and coming back. So they're going to go, most companies are going to go to those back office functions. So rather than trying to try and basically do more with what you have or do more with less. And so to me, that prioritization goes from how do you go over and automate things? How do you improve things? But keep in mind, we talked about this a little earlier. Ask the questions if you're producing a bunch of reports every month, go out to the recipients. Are these things useful? Are you using these? What are you not using? If there's a 5-page report that you produce and it goes out to 10 people and all 10 people say, yeah, page forward, never even look at it. Stop producing it and free up that time so that now maybe that report can be produced faster. And now you have extra capacity in your team to maybe do something else. So really go and revisit the work that you are doing. Too often companies go and say, we have this report, we run this report, we've been doing this for years, and nobody ever thinks about it. And what happens is it gets sent out and it sits in people's inboxes, and maybe once or twice a year they might open it up and look at the report. But in general, they're not even using it. What's the point of doing that? You're not adding any value to the team. So ask the recipients of whatever you're producing, is this useful? Why is it useful? How could it be more useful? Are there areas of it that's not useful? And really go and try and make sure that what you are doing is driving the greatest value. Because in a market like this, when teams are especially back office teams being looked on how can we cut costs, you want to make sure that you're coming off as the team that is driving value and making a difference. And if you're doing that, and it's not just for the CFO, but for business leaders, when you're supporting them, I've had business leaders say to me and say to my bosses, I need Glenn at the table with me when I'm making a decision because I appreciate his insights. Or, you know what, I can't live without, I can't manage my team without these reports that the FP&A group is doing. They're not going to cut you because that you're showing the value that you're driving. So to me, It's be efficient and drive value. And that's really what the priorities are going to be.
No, that's that's very true. We've seen like so many, especially in the tech industry, companies cutting back and scaling back on their resources across the board, and finance is not immune to it. So I think it's just trying to figure out how you can do more with less, and that is part of the challenge. So when we think about this, do you think solutions like ChatGPT is going to make a difference in that? Because is there an opportunity to continue to drive efficiencies by using technologies like those?
It's a really good question. And the answer is, to be honest, I don't know. I guess in theory, yes, because can Chat GBT go and help you write your analysis in a faster way? Yeah. But is it going to have the right data? That's the part that's unknown. I think AI and machine learning is very interesting. And when you're looking at large data sets of things, if you are, Microsoft or Procter and Gamble, and you have these massive customer bases and you got a ton of data, oh my God, yes, those types of systems are going to sift through that data so much faster than any human being is going to be able to do it, no question. But if you work at a company that's 150 million in revenue and you got about 2 to 3,000 customers, it's probably going to cost you more than the benefit you're going to get out of it to go over and try and not only acquire that technology, but then incorporate that technology so it produces meaningful results. And so I think right now it is still in the beginning stages, and I haven't seen anything. I've seen a lot of different vendors come out with some kind of AI ML solution. I haven't seen ChatGPT yet. That I would be kind of interested in seeing how that could flow, but I haven't seen a solution that says, "Oh my God, this is really going to save a ton of work in a company that has an FP&A team under 15 people." Because most of the solutions are more of, oh, you know what? Somebody's filling in a budget template and they put $3,000 of travel every single month, but one month they put 300,000 in travel. And they'll say, oh, you know what? The AI is going to go over and pop out. Hey, wait a second. This doesn't look right. Yeah, that's true, but it doesn't really take that. It doesn't take a lot of skill and time to go and spot that mistake either. So is that really going to be adding that significant value? I think the jury's still out on that, to be honest. I think down the road it could be, as these technologies are more incorporated into EPM solutions and ERP solutions, and it's connected with that data, and it's designed for helping finance do flux analysis or variance analysis or put together, board decks and trend graphs and those types of things. Yeah, but I haven't seen it yet.
Okay. I was curious, you talking about being more efficient. What are your thoughts on outsourcing? A lot of companies, I think, probably over the last 10 years have, done a lot of outsourcing in accounting, but, have you seen that trend also in the FP&A space?
So I've seen it at one company, and it didn't really work that well. And the reason for that is the value of FP&A isn't to produce a report. And it's not to go over and take a bunch of numbers and put into a graph and analyze it. It's to build out those relationships with the business so that you understand, what do those numbers really mean and where are they going? And when you're outsourcing stuff, you are not connecting those people oftentimes to the business. And if you are going to connect them to the business, now I have a different kind of concern, because then why not just bring those internal? Because you're going to have this relationship that's going to be built out, and then those outsourced resources can go away at any time, be replaced, and now you're starting all over. So to me, FP&A is very different than accounting, because it's not about going through and booking certain journal entries and putting together a balance sheet or a cash flow that people from an external point of view can probably get it 90% correct. FP&A is more about interpreting and building out that partnership, that it requires that it's not something that you typically could step into a new role and within 1 month be 100% productive as if you've been there for 5 years. You build and grow, and every single month, every single week, you typically get better. You learn more how to apply that knowledge. And now all of a sudden, the insights and solutions that you're putting forward are that much more meaningful. And so if you're trying to outsource FP&A, unless you're talking about just straight report production. But then I'd say you could just, why outsource it? Why not just get a system? Because the system could go and do that for you.
Right. No, again, we've been talking about digital transformation. So what is your vision for digital transformation over the next year to 3 years, the midterm?
I look at it as the number one thing that has to go through digital transformation. Number one, you got to have clean, consistent, organized data. Otherwise, the whole thing gets called apart, right? Garbage in, garbage out. We've all heard the expression. So it needs to start with a data governance council of some kind, data governance at a company that goes over, make sure that if you have, a customer set up in your CRM program, that it's going to be set up with the same name, same IDs that are going to be in your ERP, your EPM, your project management system, whatever, to make sure the data connects. That is the first. But where it's going to, oh, sorry, I'm getting a little feedback. Where this is going to go is the digital transformation really needs to then, once that data is clean, have all the report production, everything that is repetitive should be automated. And it should come out and let the team really focus on the things that the systems can't do. Analyzing, communicating, interpreting, those types of things. And when you think about how FP&A is going to be evolving, one of the things I think about is you might end up with pretty soon a data scientist in FP&A just to go over and connect and organize the data. And then you're going to have somebody who's going to be more like a storyteller, who's really going to go out, take the data, put it in the perspective of the whole company and say, here's what that data means and how we can use it. So I kind of see the digital transformation moving and kind of splitting FP&A, if you will, into two different sides. One associated to data and data management, data organization, data definitions, and the other side around interpretation, storytelling, and presentations.
No, that's good. So, and again, we are seeing that digital transformation, to your point, is that companies are having to become more efficient. So that's, one of the big opportunities that we're seeing. So my last question, got a few more minutes left. My last question is, what do you think FP&A as an organization are doing well? Speaking to your various colleagues, and where can we improve?
So where FP&A, I think, does well is typically building out good relationships with the business, getting the business to trust finance and to recognize that it's a partnership. It's not, I've been at companies where they say, oh, you know what? No, finance, you guys are always against us. You're always telling us no. No, that's not what it's about. So building that bridge between the business and finance, I think, is what FP&A does really, really well. Where FP&A needs to improve is to recognize that you have data that comes to FP&A from various sources. And oftentimes FP&A points a finger and says, well, that data is not very good. And that data is not defined well. And that data keeps on moving around. Well, okay, fine. But what are you doing to help solve that? I think FP&A needs to become more proactive with the overall data that is be provided to FP&A and how it's defined, how it's produced, to make sure you're getting the most consistent, accurate data so that your analysis and your insights are going to be that much better. And so that's the one thing that I've heard a lot over the last maybe 3 or 4 years about people complaining that data isn't good, but then they're not doing anything about how to fix it. And I think that's where FP&A can help drive some solutions.
No, that's a great thing. Again, the work that we do, data is always the biggest challenge. It's always the stumbling block that causes the most problems. So, and being able to get FP&A involved is always a challenge, because everybody owns like their different areas and responsible for their data. But like you say, just getting that master data down and being the stewards and helping the company understand the importance of good quality master data is critical. Well, Glenn, it's been a pleasure as you always, and I really appreciate your time. Got so much insights, especially team leadership, being part of a team. I think really got a deeper understanding of kind of what we can do as an FP&A team, and Good luck with all the new with what you're doing at the moment, and hopefully we'll have you on our webinar again soon. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, James. I appreciate it.
And there's lots of people on LinkedIn that are also saying thank you, Glenn. So we appreciate it. All right. Thank you. Bye.